movie night. We're back with another review, this time of a movie I've been looking forward to since they announced it. I think I heard about it over a year ago is when I first started hearing about them putting this together. You have Claire Foy and Ryan Gosling. I put Claire Foy first. I'm going to talk about why I said her name first before Ryan Gosling in a moment. This has an all-star cast. I'll put a link in the description if you want to see the whole cast. I'm not going to name them all off here, but been looking forward to this movie for a long time. I am a NASA nut job. I used to want to be an astronaut when I was a kid. Grew up learning all about the moon landing, the planets, solar system, galaxies, universe, all of it. Love all of it. I own from the Earth to the Moon series that was produced by Tom Hanks. Apollo 13 is one of my favorite films of all time. I even go into the other movies like Moon, The Martian, Red Planet, Mission to Mars, all that shit. Love it. We're going to get into this one. Now, this is a spoiler review, but this is like a spoiler review like you would spoil Titanic. We all know that it hits the iceberg and sinks, right? We know that they go to the moon in this one. I will say this. Even though I love NASA and everything, I'm also a conspiracy buff, meaning I find conspiracies with things like this interesting. And, you know, people have said that they faked the moon landing and all that. And I'm going to get to my thoughts about that in a moment. There are some elements in here where if you're a conspiracy nut job, I'll have a section for you. I'm not saying I believe it or not, and I'll talk about that when we get into that section about did we really go to the moon and all that, and how that's kind of, there's a little wink and a nod to some conspiracy people in this film, and I'll talk about that in a second. That's probably as spoilery as I'm going to get with it because there are no spoilers in this film. So, and I'm going to have myself a drink while we're doing this. As always. So we start with this. Now, Neil Armstrong is the person in the movie that the movie focuses on the most. Obviously, the movie's called First Man, so they're going to concentrate on Ryan Gosling playing Neil Armstrong. Now, going into the film, I think a lot of people, if you generally know about the moon landing, but you don't know all the details behind it. Like I said, if you haven't watched From the Earth to the Moon, if you are interested in this, I highly recommend From Earth to the Moon. They show every aspect of the Apollo program and the Gemini program in that. Tom Hanks, they nailed that series, and it was bridged off of Apollo 13, which is, even compared to this, Apollo 13 is probably still my favorite documentary-styled mission in the Apollo missions. I think that was the most well put together film of space travel as far as NASA is concerned, right? So in this film, they really focus on Neil Armstrong and his dynamic with him wanting to be an astronaut versus what does that mean when you are not only an astronaut, but you're a husband and a father. The movie opens up in a way where I didn't think they would, which I thought was very interesting. You start off with him doing a rocket burn. They're doing a test or whatever. But then you find out right after this rocket burn that he is a great family man. He's a great father. He's a great husband. But his daughter has cancer. And she dies from cancer very early on in the film. So right off the bat, you realize, wow, Neil Armstrong, when he landed on the moon, he had some stuff going on in his life that was life-changing for just an ordinary person, not let alone someone who is an astronaut working for NASA. How do you balance those two? Claire Foy, and like I said, there's a reason why I put her name first. She is unbelievable in this role as Janet Armstrong. She nails it out of the park. Now, I haven't seen a lot of her work. I know that she's in the series The Queen, and that she's going to be playing Alicia Vikander. I would say Alicia Vikander. She's going to be playing the new. She's the new lead in the Spider Tattoo series. So this is the first time I actually got to see her in a role like this. Even though this is a big cast, we keep going back to Claire Foy and Ryan Gosling's and that home dynamic and how much after their daughter dies, Neil Armstrong is disconnected from his family, and he kind of feels the void with NASA and the space program. So he kind of fills that hole in his heart with wanting to basically get away. And what better way to get away is to get into a rocket and blasting off the planet and going into outer orbit Earth orbit and to the moon, essentially, right? But at the same time, now that they've had this tragedy in their family, his wife is, after they had their third child, which is, he has 2 boys left behind, she's wanting him to connect with the family more, get more engaged with the kids. But it's clearly obvious that Ryan Gosling's character, Neil Armstrong, was closest to his daughter. She just had a sweet spot in his heart for him, and he basically put all his love and all his attention to this little girl, and it broke his heart. And he's never really pieced himself back together throughout this entire film. You can just tell he is fractured and wounded in this film. And I think it plays very well because you have this overly emotional, his wife Janet she just oozing emotion and wanting something out of him as far as family goes, but she knows she does not have that. His passion for the family has kind of gone away, and his true passion is NASA. But the way they play this, and I went to go see this with my mother. She kept bringing this up the entire movie. He doesn't talk that much. Talking about Neil Armstrong. Was he really that quiet? And because Ryan Gosling plays him he's stoic. He has his hero confidence about him. He has his leader confidence about him. But at the same time, he is he's a fucking robot. He is so detached from people that he almost comes across like he's an alien at sometimes. He is emotionless. The only times he shows any real emotion is when he's thinking about his daughter. And he thinks about his daughter more than he thinks about anybody else in his family. It's very clear. He even sees her at some point, his daughter, in a room, and she's not there. I mean, that's how traumatized this guy was from this. And I think a lot of people, because I didn't know about his daughter before seeing this movie. I had no clue that they had lost a daughter. A lot of people thought that Neil acted very strange when he came back from the moon, and some of the conferences he would have, how strange he would act during press conferences. When he does speeches, they say he's a little distraught and weird. And a lot of people thought, well, what happened? Why is he like that? And this will lead me into the conspiracy side of it. Now, if you're a conspiracy nut job, like I am, excuse me, I'm not just talking about the moon landings with conspiracy. I'm talking about just conspiracy in general. When it comes to assassinations, world history, anything you can think of. I just find conspiracy interesting. Doesn't mean that I believe what I'm reading or what I'm hearing or what I'm seeing. It just means I find conspiracies very interesting. And I've always found the moon landing conspiracy very interesting, regardless of if I believe it or not. If you're a conspiracy nut job, like I am, whether you believe it or not, there are some things in this movie that kind of tips his hat to people who have researched conspiracies. Because there's a reason why a lot of people think Neil Armstrong is the way he was when he came back from the moon. And even before the moon, even during the missions, why he's so reluctant to kind of sharing emotion about what he's doing. He's going to go to the moon, and the guy is just like blank face. And then they show this in the film. He has no excitement about going to the moon, about the program, or nothing. He just wants to get it perfect and make sure that they don't have any problems. There is a major problem they have in the film, not with the film quality, obviously, but in the film, in one of the Gemini missions, he basically saved him and the co-pilot he's with from dying in space by just being on top of his game, knowing exactly what to do in these situations, which is what garnered him the honor from NASA to be able to be the first person to step on the moon. Taking that into account, you understand that Neil Armstrong was a man who's no bullshit, wanted things done correctly, wanted things done right on time. He wants problems to happen, so when the real problems happen, he knows how to respond to them. And there's a scene in the movie where his wife, Janet, comes to him and says, you know, you're about to go to the moon. You're packing your stuff. You haven't said anything to your 2 boys. And she basically makes him sit down and explain to his kids that he's going to be leaving on this mission to the moon and that he may not come back. She wants him to do it because she thinks it's unfair for him to leave her to answer the questions if anything was to happen to him on the moon. And the thought crossed my mind in the movie was like, well, when he talks to him, he's very cold. And he just kind of matter-of-factly just says, you know, yeah, there's a chance I might not be back. And I'm thinking of watching a movie as a father myself. That's not how I would spend my last moments with my kids if I thought something might happen to me on a mission where I may never return. And what I thought was interesting about that is maybe he didn't have any emotion about it because he knew that it was a hoax the whole time. I'm going to the conspiracy people. If you wanted to read it that way, this movie, if you went into it believing that the moon missions was a hoax, some of the scenes in the movie would literally back you up. By the way, Ryan Gosling plays this character in the way that this movie is structured and edited together. There are some things where you're like, wow, if you're a conspiracy theorist, it lends itself to that because no, he wouldn't get himself in a mind frame to say to his kids, hey, I'm not coming back, if he honestly believed he wasn't going to come back because he wasn't going to go in the first place. That all of it was a hoax, and that the reason why he's so blank-faced is because he wishes he actually could go to the moon, and he can't. Now, again, that's just me looking at it as conspiracy theory if I was playing devil's advocate with a conspiracy theorist, right? The last scene of the movie, he comes back, he's in quarantine, his wife walks in. They sit down, there's no dialogue. She's looking in his eyes with tears in her eyes, and she's looking at him, begging for him to say something about what just happened. The man just walked on the moon. And he's looking at her like someone just died. And she's looking at him like, what's going on? So he finally, he kisses his hand and puts it to the glass. And then she's looking at him like, that's all you're going to do? So knowing her husband and knowing who he is, she finally just gives in and just puts her hand on the glass. And he just touches the glass with his index finger. And the movie goes to credits. And I think a lot of people are going to be like, what the fuck was wrong with Neil Armstrong? Well, it's very simple. If you're a conspiracy theorist, you're thinking, hey, he's looking like that because there's nothing to report. He didn't go anywhere and he doesn't want to lie to his wife about it. So again, if you're a conspiracy theorist, if you're looking at the movie at the lens of a conspiracy theorist, this movie does a little wink to you, like, hey guys, maybe you're onto something. Now, again, I like conspiracy theories. I don't know if we've been up there or not. I don't believe in anything I haven't seen or I can't do myself. But I'm going to take the word for it. We've been to the moon, right? The concept been to the moon. What's great about this movie, getting off the conspiracy thing, that was a conspiracy theory section there. Now back to reality, so to speak. The moon landing itself was gorgeous. It's one of the best moments. I think that alone is worth you going to see this movie. And if you haven't tell, I actually love this movie. This is my favorite movie of the year by far. Followed by Black Klansman and number 3 coming in, A Quiet Place. That's just this year, 2018. When we're never going to land on the moon, once the module is close to landing, some of the shots are breathtaking. I saw this movie in IMAX. This is the first movie I've ever seen in IMAX, and I thought it was a perfect movie for me to see it in. It's gorgeous. The sound design in this movie is insane, and they go from like empty silence where there's nothing going on to some of the loudest sounds you've ever heard in a film. The dynamic between the two, I would say, is on par with Interstellar and Gravity, where you just have these vacuum silences, and then you have some of the loudest scenes I've ever heard in a theater in this movie. The rocket blast-offs, when they take off to go on these missions, is so loud, so intense, so shaky. The whole film is shot handheld. You can tell very rarely do they put a camera on a tripod or for a tracking shot. It's mostly handheld, and it's moving a lot. The whole movie gives you kind of this sense like you're always moving and you're not standing still, which kind of mimics what you would be when you're out, if you were going to be on a mission like that. Another great thing about this movie is the acting. Everybody plays their part well. I thought that the movie was paced well. It was edited well. It's a long movie. I personally would have sat there for another hour if they would have let me. I've heard some people say that they didn't particularly like the length of the film. There were some scenes that could have got cut out, but I didn't see really any scenes that could have cut out to piece this together, unless you cut out some of the scenes where he's basically just thinking about his daughter or he's just staring in outer space, because there are a lot of shots of Neil Armstrong basically just zoning out. And like I said, the score is unbelievable. The score for this film, if I heard it before I saw the film, I would think that cannot go with this movie. But when you see it with the movie, you see that the score is just perfect for this film. The way it's so simple, but it's the themes and the way that it unfolds, it hits right at the right spots. The score is just fits it perfectly. It's not overbearing, comes in when it needs to, and I thought it was great. The cinematography is great. It feels like it's in the 1960s. Again, I thought the editing was good. The cinematography is some of the best cinematography you have for anything like a space. Anytime you can go off of the planet and you start talking about movies like Gravity, Interstellar, Mission to Mars, The Martian, films like that, Moon, Life, all those films where, Space Odyssey 2001, where the sun is just right there prominent, is lighting everything up. You know when things look real and when they don't. And I thought the moon, this was the best looking moon we've ever seen in a film, in my opinion. I mean, and again, I saw it in IMAX, but you can literally see like the sparkling of like the moon rocks, the reflected. I mean, just the details on the moon itself, on the astronauts' suits, the lunar module, the way the Earth looked from the moon, all of it is just perfect, absolutely perfect. I think this movie, which is so crazy, but for it to focus on one person, you really did get a sense of how NASA works at the same time. Even though they were focusing on Neil, and he's in basically every shot, at least when he's on Earth, and once he gets up there, obviously they got to cut back, but he's in virtually every shot of the film. You feel the weight of NASA. But now obviously when I do these film reviews, I got to put in some negatives. If I had any negatives, I think it would be, there are some things, I have to look at a lens of somebody who doesn't know anything about this. If you don't know anything about the space program, there's some stuff that's going to go right over your head. And they're going to kind of require you to have some basis of what was going on at NASA at the time. What's the difference between the Gemini program and the Apollo program? What's the difference between doing an outer Earth orbit versus the technicality of trying to get to the moon? Now I study all that, I'm fine with it because I've been studying it my whole life. But for somebody who doesn't know, they don't explain it. They just say, "Hey, look, this is what happens when they get in this rocket and they blast off." They don't say, "Hey, this is the one that's going to the moon." You either know it or you just kind of follow along. So I don't know what this film would be like if you don't know anything about these missions, the Apollo missions, the space program itself, NASA itself, how it works. Deke, if you don't know who that is, that probably means you don't know a whole lot about NASA. If you don't know about Roger Chappie and the fire incident in the doing a test mission where the 3 astronauts got burned alive, if you don't know anything about that, that's going to go right over your head because they do the scene and they move on. I knew everything that was going to happen. The only thing that surprised me in this film was literally all the Neil Armstrong stuff because he is very private. He doesn't do a lot of interviews. He doesn't do a lot of press conferences. He doesn't talk about the moon landing all that much. And again, if you're a conspiracy theorist, that lends right into your theory is, why don't we talk about the moon landing as much as we do? Why is it that most of the population, even in the United States, couldn't tell you that if their life depended on it, the date and time we actually went to the moon? Why don't we have a holiday celebrating the moon? We have Valentine's Day, we have Labor Day, we have Halloween, but we don't celebrate the moon landing. The moon landing should be celebrated like New Year's Eve. It should be a world event, but it's not. We do not celebrate the moon landing at all. There's no anniversary for it. I mean, you have some news channels that do it, but there should be a holiday for it, right? So if you're a conspiracy theorist, you're thinking, why don't we have a holiday for this? So I think that's what's so crazy about this particular mission, the moon landing mission, is that for the guy who walks on the moon for the first time, we have a whole wealth of knowledge about him that we don't know. That we didn't know that he had a kid that died of cancer. We didn't know that he kind of shut down after that kid died and was kind of turned into basically a shell of himself. Even though he was doing all this incredible stuff with NASA at home, he was a shell of himself. He was a shell of who Neil Armstrong could have been. And maybe he would have talked more if his little girl had survived. Maybe he wouldn't have went to the moon at all. Who knows? And it's like that little girl played a very important part in his personal story. And I appreciated that because they put it in the film and set it up as a narrative that started from the beginning of the movie to the end. And I thought that was a really unique way of presenting Neil Armstrong to the audience because we didn't know that about him. So I kind of had this carrot for people who quote unquote think we know everything about NASA and all the astronauts, that was a little piece of it to keep you invested in the Neil Armstrong story and the Apollo missions, because going into it, I'm like, well, what are they going to show me that I don't already know? You know, and they do it in a way where they cut out all the stuff that they do think you know. Even with some of the rocket sequences, they're all shot inside. You don't see a lot of outside shots of the rockets. Except when they went to the moon, there's a few shots where they actually show the outside of the rocket. But for the most part, all the shots are interior, inside the cockpit. You see what the astronauts see. You hear what they hear. And I thought that was cool, because we have seen rockets going out of space. We have seen moon landings and everything, but we hadn't seen it in the way that it's presented in this movie. Even when they go to the moon, the camera is not up close. The camera actually backs off and lets you see the scale of how small that lunar module was in comparison to the moon. I thought that was cool. I thought that worked. That was a different look. We hadn't seen that before. We actually got to see a new perspective of Neil Armstrong looking up at the Earth from the moon. How bright the sun actually is from the moon versus here on Earth, where we have an atmosphere to cut out some of the sunlight. How bright that sun is on the moon. How fine that the powdery sand of the moon. All that is presented very well in this film. Even when they strap you inside of the cockpit, all of that stuff is done so well. The little intricate sounds that we haven't heard before in a film like this. Now, again, I saw this in IMAX, so I would recommend, if you can get to the biggest screen possible. This film was shot in IMAX, so I would recommend, if you can get to an IMAX theater to see this, see it in IMAX, because it was my first IMAX experience, and I'm glad I saw this one for my first one, because again, I'm such a NASA nut job. I feel like I've seen all this before, and today actually felt like this was the first time I actually felt like I'm on the moon. The way that they shot it, it's all first person, some of the shots, so you actually feel like you're in the suit walking around on this moon. You're in the modules. You're in NASA's on the tests and all the stuff that they do. You feel like you're right there. Everything's shot up close. It's just incredible how well edited this film was and how well shot it was. So that's my review of First Man. If you have a chance to go see it, if you're interested in space at all, NASA, this will not disappoint. Even if you think you know everything about NASA, you're going to learn a whole lot in this film. I know I just learned a whole lot that I did not know before I saw this film. And I thought I knew practically everything about NASA. As many books that I've read and seen all the documentaries. Again, if you're a conspiracy theorist, there's some stuff in here that were actually, like I said, they actually address some of the things moon hoax wise. Now, I'm not saying they're showing you like this is how they do a moon. That's not what I mean. If you're a conspiracy theorist, go check it out. You'll see some of the scenes I'm talking about. There are some things in here where you're like, wow, why would they put this in the movie if it's not true, kind of thing. And again, if you're not a conspiracy theorist, it'll go right over your head. But if you are, there are some things in this movie where it's like, oh, that makes sense if you're a conspiracy theorist. So it's a little bit for everybody. Whether you believe it in or not, go see this movie. I highly recommend it. That'll do it for this movie night. I'll see you guys on the next one. Take care.